Welcome to the Geekcentric podcast, and welcome to our spoiler-free review for Marvel Studios' Captain America: Brave New World. Captain America. Have you ever asked yourself, who's playing who? Hello, I'm Jayla, but you can call me Justin. And if you're joining us for the first time, well, we are Geekcentric, a podcast covering the world of movies, TV shows, toys, collectibles, gaming, and all things Geekcentric. Joining me for today's spoiler-free review are two dudes who are way too cool to have Red Hulk status, but I would certainly take either one of them as my Falcon to my Cap. Nate Shelton, Darcy Hudson, how you both doing?
On your left.
I guess I'm on your right.
I guess so. You are the wind beneath my wings.
It depends on how the screens are organized
Sure.
on their little virtual recording platform. Doing good, man. Yeah, always a good time to talk about Marvel stuff.
You ready to pick up this shield and smash this review? Because I'm excited to chat with you. We've already done some extensive chatting, which is against the rules for us most of the time. But before we actually start talking about the movie, you know, this is the fourth installment in the Captain America franchise. And I have to say, as a fan of the series, I do think it is probably the strongest trilogy. Like, the first three have been the strongest solo hero films, I think stronger than Iron Man. I don't think we have one stronger than Thor to a certain degree. I think Captain America has definitely had three strong films, and I want to ask you guys, of those three, which one was your favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I think my favorite was definitely the first Avenger because it is so special and it is from that early era of MCU when we didn't quite know what we were getting into and in terms of the scale and what was to come after that movie. But just that exploration of the character and just the way that they focus on where his origins and how that affected who he was. I really enjoyed the way they brought the character to the screen in that first film.
Yeah, awesome. How about for you?
I think for me, I think everyone might expect Winter Soldier. I think Civil War for me, actually.
I figured Civil War
for me
was the one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, because I think it's one of those things where I guess it's a little bit more of an Avengers movie than it is a Captain America movie. Sure. I love the Captain America films. Captain America is not my favorite of the Marvel characters in any of the capacities, but I think that obviously the movies are really great, and of course, Winter Soldier is it takes it in a completely different genre. But I just really liked what Civil War did, and I to this day I think about those sequences between Cap and Iron Man fighting, and just the look on Robert Downey Jr.'s face as he's told the truth is just it's heart-wrenching and fantastic. And I just think it's such a good performance heavy film. So that's probably my favorite.
For sure.
How about you?
For me, I got to say it's my favorite film of the MCU catalog. It has been for a while, and that is The Winter Soldier. It is number 2. I think, again, I feel like Captain America: The Winter Soldier, in a lot of ways, in my mind, made Captain America: The First Avenger better, but also set up what would be Civil War, living in this sort of rich political spy thriller drama, if you will. But really, with Winter Soldier, it's always been my favorite of the Captain America because it's where I first really noticed how a genre, specifically as I mentioned, the political spy thriller, could be fused and woven into the superhero story for the MCU. And coming off of, phase 1 into Winter Soldier, this was so refreshing to see because it really was a hybrid. It lived in that camp of feeling more of like a political drama at times. And since, I don't know, like for me, and I've talked about it a lot in this podcast, I think I've been more attuned to how, a lot of IP based films and TV shows can shape their narratives and stories through that lens of genre. And I appreciate when those stories can commit and understand what they're going for. And I think it delivers something that is completely fresh. I think the most recent, and it's in the same camp, but Skeleton Crew, it's in the Disney family. I feel like that was the one that I really kind of like, it hit me how well they were mixing that genre of that sort of emblem, adventure with that. So I feel like Winter Soldier kind of kicked that off for me in a lot of ways, and has continued to be kind of my go-to. And I did rewatch all the movies leading into this fourth film, and it definitely always just that first sequence where you see Cap land on that ship and just annihilate everyone. Like, it just gave me goosebumps. Like, I was like, damn, like he is comfortable now. He was the first Avenger, the hero out of time, if you will. Now he's still out of time, but like, he is fully immersed, and he has this whole understanding about what's going on with, the aspects of the government, and so on and so forth. So I don't know. It was a really nice and refreshing take on as a sequel, especially coming off, as you said, Darcy, the sort of special period piece story that Captain America: The First Avenger was. But now here we are, 3 films later, we are here for Captain America 4. We did have a series in between that, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which definitely sets up Sam Wilson as Cap. But this has been a long time coming. So let me get you up to speed on this movie. In Captain America: Brave New World, Sam Wilson finds himself in the middle of an international incident after meeting with newly elected U.S. President Thaddeus Ross. He must discover the reason behind a nefarious global plot before the true mastermind has the entire world seeing red. Wow. Marvel Studios' Captain America: Brave New World stars Anthony Mackie, Danny Ramirez, Shira Haas, Carl Lumley, Saoirse Roquemore, with Giancarlo Esposito, Liv Tyler, Tim Blake Nelson, and Harrison Ford. The film is directed by Julius Ona and produced by Kevin Feige and Nate Moore. Louis D'Esposito and Charles Neuwirth serve as executive producers on the film. Captain America: Brave New World opens in theaters on February 14th, 2025. A huge thanks, as always, to our friends at Marvel Studios Canada, and by extension, Disney Studios Canada, for inviting us out to see this film early before it hits theaters this Friday. I think it's time that we Hulk smash, Hulk clap our way through this spoiler-free review.
You feeling okay? You're turning red there, Justin.
It's just the lighting in my room.
Okay.
Let's start by talking about the look and feel. I think the look and feel, like, just to kind of kick things off and kind of pose the question to you guys. We talked about how the spy thriller espionage vibe of Winter Soldier really helps cement that film, and it feels like this film is definitely trying to adopt that while also throwing in, I think, some MCU traditions, if you will, some of the more fantastical elements. How did you feel about that balance in this film? Did it work? Does it stick to one camp, or do you feel like it's a little messy? We'll start with Darcy.
There are times where it definitely did work for me, where it felt like we were watching very much the sequel to a Winter Soldier style like thriller. But then there are other times where it almost feels like it leaned too much into that MCU side and became a bit too fantastical, even though we are watching superheroes. So it was weird. Again, I think for the most part, it did really nail the tone and setting. It's just a lot of the things that kind of around the story that I think really kind of brought me out of that whole thriller aspect that I didn't find myself experiencing during Winter Soldier.
Yeah, I think the movie kind of has a bit of an identity problem, right?
Yes.
And we've talked about that quite a bit with a lot of the things that we review, and especially within the genres that we review and cover. I want to call out the when we're talking about the look and feel, Justin, you mentioned that first sequence of Steve Rogers coming down and kicking ass, and I think the action sequences in this movie definitely were a standout. I think there was a lot of very noticeable awkward cuts happening throughout the fight sequences, but I think there's some fantastic choreography, and we saw it a little bit in Falcon and Winter Soldier in that finale, and we get to see it here. And I like how it sort of gives Sam his own authentic style. It's a fresh Captain America, and it's also cool because we're seeing, just like you said, where we saw a confident, capable Steve Rogers. We're seeing a confident, capable Sam Wilson. That doesn't mean that he doesn't learn throughout the film or that he doesn't struggle throughout the film. But the action was immediately something that made me smile.
Yeah, to your point, he's been Cap for a while, so he's been holding that shield. He's been running, what would you call it? He's been running missions and so on and so forth with the government. So he's gotten comfortable with that title, with that shield, and understanding what he's capable of doing with his wings and so on and so forth. And that shows in a lot of the action sequences. But I'm with you, Darcy. I think that, like, in a lot of ways, there are moments within this film that very much capture the paranoid espionage vibe that the film really touts itself for going for, that it's really reaching for, and that really does lean more into that Winter Soldier vibe. But I don't know if it's as consistent as I would have liked it to be. I think the
Mm-hmm.
strongest sequence, and obviously it's in the trailers, but it's the Isaiah Bradley sequence in the White House. Seeing that whole scene unfold really did kind of give me that, like, tension that you'd expect, like an assassination attempt and so on and so forth. It made it very, very thrilling. But I think, talking about some of the actions as well, it's choreographed well, but I think sometimes it felt a little rushed. Like you said, Nate, cuts were a bit awkward at times, and I think some of the visual effects, kind of tying that into it as well, also felt a little rushed. I think some of it felt a little sloppy at times, where it kind of took me out, where I was like, oh, well, that just doesn't look authentic. And that's not just in action moments. I'll preface, it's also in non-action moments.
Hmm.
And I won't necessarily give anything away, but there are some moments where it's like, well, that's clearly been, inserted into this part of the movie because they must have done a reshoot or they must have
Mm-hmm.
reshot something, and it felt unauthentic to the scenes before, which felt far more authentic because it might have been more on location.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. The more time we spend with this movie, the more we start seeing those issues kind of arise. I think, especially towards that later act, where we feel. I think that's definitely where those reshoots and the production issues that arose during shooting definitely affected the story. Because again, there are parts that were clearly put in after the thought, or and didn't take the time to shoot on location. So it just the look for one shot will take you out, going back to that original one, then back to a sound stage somewhere, and back and forth. It was a bit jarring, and that again, the more the time you spend in the movie, the more that becomes noticeable, which is unfortunate.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a tough time with criticizing visual effects because I think there is so much that goes into these things. It's magic to see this stuff on the screen, and these teams work incredibly hard. But I think there is something to still criticize in regards to the choices in how the writing team will work with the director, will work with a cinematographer, who will work with a visual effects team, right? And I think there is still work that could have been a bit better on this film because of that. And I think a lot of it has to do, like you guys are saying, with how things had to be reshot. I think the color grading for me, Darcy, you mentioned, like, going from literally one camera angle to another had slightly different color
Hmm.
grading, which is just something that, again, I'm not Justin, you're our camera guy. I'm not really that kind of guy. And so for me to notice these things, I can notice a beautiful shot, but for me to notice means that there is something there that stood out in a rough way. And I think, I will take a CGI wing flying moment that looks a bit rubbery. I'll take that because this is an action movie. But I think the part where it really hurts is when we have scenes that are supposed to be these massive emotional moments, and you're taken out because of all these distractions, all these visual effects things. And I think, again, talking about the writing team working with the director, working with the visual effects folks, I understand that maybe you've got a very specific vision for this comic book movie. It's not always going to be feasible once a certain amount of work has already been done. But there's a moment in this movie between Sam and another character, and they're just talking in a hospital room. And literally, that was so much more impactful. That allowed the performances to really shine. And it was an emotional moment that hits and works really, really, really well in comparison to something going on within the climax of this film that just sort of feels just fake and inauthentic because it is, right, and that's how it had to be made. I just wonder if there could have been something done to sort of say, hey, this really isn't working, let's move this to a like you were saying, Justin, an on-set, a real world location instead of something with these green screens.
Sure, and I think part of that comes from the fact that they already did their shoots on that location, so they're not going back, so they have to recreate it. So that is where the reshoot mentality comes in, and I
Right.
think we're talking about the same scene, but yes, the lighting choices and the sort of optics of making the shot from cold to warm, and that just drew more apparency because our eyes will naturally see those things. So I think it's, again, I think it's just, to your point, it's not to knock the effort that went into this, it's just to call
Hmm.
out the obvious moments that it takes us out, and we now are sort of demystified, or we're peeking behind the curtain, if you will, to see that this is different from that. And that's just part of, I guess, when you watch a lot of movies, you start to see these things, right? You start to notice it. And we can talk a little bit about that more, this idea of reshooting and rewriting when we get to story. But I think you were mentioning it, Darcy. I feel like the one thing that really stood out to me about this film is that it's sort of a mixed bag when it comes to look and feel. Like, it feels less at times like a Captain America movie and more of a mix of like the Incredible Hulk. And that's not just because of having like a red Hulk, but partially, but I think it's also just the characters and so on, which we'll talk about. But it also finds elements of like a Civil War and a little bit of Winter Soldier as well mixing in there. And I think it's just, as you said, Nate, it's that identity crisis that it's going through.
Hmm.
And it's not really committing to any one of those. It's trying to mix them all. And I think Civil War, like Civil War is probably the single best example of how you can scale from something like Winter Soldier that was very grounded, go to something like Civil War, which has more characters, but and some of them are fantastical. You got Vision in there, you got
Got a
a
giant
giant
man
man,
rocking
yeah, you know
around,
what I
right?
mean. But
Yeah.
it still felt grounded, right? Like, it still
Hmm.
felt like it was still part of that family. Whereas this film, when it comes to its look and feel, it kind of dances between a variety of different MCU styles to kind of give its own flavor of story.
And I think like one of the cool things about Civil War was the fact that despite it being such a large ensemble cast, at its core, it was still a story about Iron Man and Captain America,
Correct. Yes.
which is why they could still call it a Captain America movie. And this one, despite having the Captain America team, we spend so much time exploring other characters' stories throughout this movie that he feels less like the main character and more just like another side character, which is weird considering, like I said, we just had a massive ensemble cast, and this
Yes.
one we're dealing with less characters, and it feels like he's kind of sharing the screen with other people as opposed to leading the film.
And this will let's get into talking about characters and performances, because I think that this is the one thing, and I just want to kick it off because we're talking about this. But yes, I think Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson has been solid throughout all of the films, and a lot of that has to do with who he's acting off of. So this is, it's a big thing for him, right? Like, this is his film, Captain America. But I still think, to your point, Darcy, they found a way to not necessarily make him like he's the main character, yes, but he's not necessarily the main focus, if you will,
Hmm.
in this story. And I think that shows in a lot of ways in how he's sharing screen time, which, again, I feel like with Anthony feeling like a secondary character, I think we could do better for Anthony Mackie. I feel like
Hmm.
we could do better. I don't know if it's Marvel Studios' full commitment to like say like, well, this is our leading Captain America man. That way, that this is why we have so many different characters featured in this, that it's more about how Anthony acts off of each of these characters, but I don't know. It just, to your point, it feels like we deviate from him. But for what he gave us, it was very top notch. Sam Wilson, I think he
Mhm.
drive that empathy. He's been talking about how empathy is Captain America's superpower, and you see that, you hear that, especially given his grassroots of where he started in Winter Soldier as being a counselor for vets. I think it's important that he maintains that, and that's what really makes him different from Steve Rogers. There's just this idea of wanting to aspire to be something like that can understand and listen rather than just throw down. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think he's a great Captain America.
Yeah.
And I think his humor's still there, right? From the Falcon and Winter Soldier. He's dropping jokes, he's dropping jabs along the way. He's very much the Sam Wilson that we know from his time as Falcon and also Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And I think there's some slower moments in the movie that really allow Mackie to shine the most. And I enjoyed him as a full-fledged Captain America who's still figuring things out, right? Like I mentioned, he's got some of the fighting down, but there's other things that he's still trying to solve in this movie. I think his physicality and his attitude towards just doing the right thing is very, not just Steve Rogers, but Captain America
Captain America,
in
yeah.
general. And I think the big thing about it, though, and I think this is where it gets tricky, and we're sort of having this feeling of he's playing second fiddle to some of the other characters in a movie called Captain America that is Anthony Mackie's Captain America movie,
Mhm.
is the fact that this Captain America and Sam Wilson in particular is such a support. He's such a support to anyone and everyone he comes in contact with. That's part of that empathy. That's part of his superpower, if you will. But I think that's where some of the writing gets confused, right? And I think that's where some of the people they almost lean on that a little bit too much, to the point where I really enjoyed Danny Ramirez in this movie. I'd love to see a Captain America movie where he's got to go rogue or he's got to go on the run or something like that with Sam Wilson. I think that would be really cool, and I think it would allow us to explore him a little bit more as just a strong lead Captain America without having to necessarily be focused on all
Sharing,
these other characters.
yeah,
Yeah.
sharing that time
Mhm.
with the other characters. I agree. I think, yeah, that's that was very much not Winter Soldier. That was, yeah, it was a bit of Winter Soldier and Civil War for
hmm
Steve Rogers, where he did have to go rogue. So
Yeah, I don't think they could necessarily repeat that. I'm just saying that, like, yeah, he deserves a bit
he just
more.
deserves a little more credit, and I think a little
Yeah,
more trust, if you will,
Yeah.
to
sure.
actually be the lead and maybe focus a little bit more, as you're saying, and as you both were saying, on him and his
hmm
story, and what that importance is for him as Captain America. 'Cause I honestly think this might be a hot take. I think the show did a better job of focusing on Sam Wilson than this movie does. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with you there because again, we that show we see him dealing with the weight of picking up the shield, and now that we've seen him kind of past that hurdle, we expect him to deal with the next big thing for Captain America, which is where do I fall in terms of who do I listen to and who gives my orders type thing. And while we do see inklings of that, we don't dive enough into how that affects who he is, unfortunately,
Mhm.
because again, he's sharing the screen with so many other fantastic actors. They cut away from him too much to give him that time to really develop the character, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk about some of those fantastic characters. I think next up on the list for everyone here is probably Harrison Ford as Thaddeus Ross. I think he's an absolute scene stealer, and he, just like Harrison, he commands attention. He adds gravitas to every scene, and in some instances, um, this movie, as much as it is called Captain America: Brave New World, this is a Thaddeus Ross story as well, and
Mhm.
it doesn't shy away from that. And I think that gives at least a little bit more humility to a character that it's always just been like the grumpy general, you know what I mean, who's hunting down Hulks. Like, there's a little more depth to Thaddeus, that Harrison gets to explore in this movie, that I appreciate, especially from an emotional level.
Mhm. I mean, again, with a name like Harrison Ford, you definitely want to utilize him, and they do that 100% in this film. It's really cool to see how he took William Hurt's brief appearances as the character to inspire where he is now, and why that's kind of fueling the change he wants to become in this movie. And it was really cool to see again Harrison Ford kind of owns anything he's in. And this one, you can really feel again he commands every scene. You believe him as Thunderbolt Ross, and you can understand a lot of what he's going through and why he's doing what he's doing. But again, it's weird that we're getting this in a Captain America movie. It almost should have been this should be Thunderbolt, and then Thunderbolts would be even funnier because completely separate from this movie type thing.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Just seems like a weird choice to focus so much on him and take away from Captain America as a result.
We're going to circle back to that because that is definitely, we're already like kind of trickling on it. But when we get to story, I think we're going to have a lot to say in and around that. But Nate, how did you feel about Harrison Ford's, addition to this movie?
Yeah, I think if you're going into this movie with any expectations, it should just be that you're going to love Harrison Ford in this movie. Like I mean, that's an easy expectation to have. I think he, like you were saying, Darcy, like he's capturing the other side of Ross in this movie that we've not really gotten to see. I think he gets to the emotional core of why he's acting the way he is in this film, and maybe why he's acted the way he has in the past. And this movie is very much about the theme of am I enough, right? And I think that wasn't just expressed through the exploration of Sam Wilson as Captain America, but as this president who's trying to impress the American people in his first term, and I think ultimately wanting to make amends with his daughter.
Yes, that's
and
the
I
biggest
think
thing. Yeah,
right. And Harrison Ford is just so damn likable. I enjoyed him so much in this movie, and again, as much as it's like I wanted this to be more of a Captain America movie, I was also very okay with how much of Harrison Ford we got in this movie. It like you're saying, Darcy, like you're saying, Justin, we'll get back to it. It maybe it felt a little misplaced, but he was the emotional core, and I think it was between him and Carl Lumley who had me starting to crack tears. Like we don't get a ton of Carl in this movie, but I think he's the biggest surprise as far as performances go, because I knew the guy could act. We knew the guy could act from Falcon and Winter Soldier, but to get me to almost tears twice was not something I was expecting. And I think Isaiah Bradley is a character who deserves every ounce of respect that Sam gives him in this film. And I just thought his chemistry was so good with Mackie as well. When we're talking about how these characters are working with Sam Wilson.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think Carl Lumley is the MVP for me of this film. I think he delivers some of the best acting in this movie. And, as Isaiah Bradley, he keeps the emotional heartbeat of the story alive in a lot of ways. And it's seen through Sam's eyes and his admiration for this forgotten hero. I think his scenes add such depth and weight and motive to the entire film. And I think that like it adds it to the film and it lacks it in other areas. But Isaiah and the story of Isaiah is so it's so easy to track. I think the missed opportunity was cluttering this film with so much more and not spending more time on that and what that really meant. But again, we'll talk about story when we get there, but I think he was outstanding. There were times, like you said, Nate, close to like tears just for understanding who his character is as Isaiah and what he's gone through. I think he was absolutely fantastic.
100%. I don't have anything to add. He was incredible in every scene we had him in.
Yeah, well, I think there's some other characters that are obviously in this film. Let's talk about Joaquin Torres, Danny Ramirez. Honestly, like he's definitely likable. I liked him. I just don't know if I really always fully got the chemistry between Sam and him as feeling authentic. It sometimes felt like very just it was acted, right? Like it was very like just actors acting. Whereas like when you think back to like Bucky and Sam, that felt natural. Bucky, or Sam and Sam and Steve, right? Like it just felt so much more natural. I think again, and I understand they're probably still figuring out how to vibe, and maybe that's what we're seeing, are some of those moments that weren't. But there are some moments, I will give it to them, that there is some moments where I feel like it's very real. But for the most part, it does feel very scripted and acted on, and I think it's just about them maybe finding more time to act off of each other or spend time with each other, that they can kind of deliver something that feels a lot more authentic.
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing that as the movie got on, I found got better was their chemistry and the believability of the banter between the two.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest issues from earlier on too is the fact that Sam Wilson has always been that witty first guy to crack a joke type thing, and it's very hard to pair someone with that and have them try and be even funnier because Sam's already a lot as it is. So if you up that to 11, it can kind of be a bit much. And
Mhm.
again, at the beginning, it definitely feels very forced, but as the movie goes on, again, they start to find that balance of where he sits in the relationship type thing.
And my theory around that is because they're acting less together in those scenes. Do you know what I mean? Like they're not like
Mm.
they're like it's almost like they start closer together at the top of the movie, and then they kind of distance each other as they go through the
Mm.
rest of the story. And I think that kind of is the effect that it has on it. But that said, I think Danny Ramirez definitely brings his all to this role. I'm interested in seeing more of him in future stories, if if that happens. So
Yeah, he's the hot-headed, pilot. We speaking of Maverick, but I think he wants to get in the air. He wants to get in the fight, right? And I think that's very respectable with his character. I enjoyed Danny Ramirez quite a bit. I think my favorite parts with him though were. Maybe not even with him and Mackie, but him with Carl Lumley, with Isaiah Bradley.
Mhm.
There's some great gags around. If you'll feel it if you've ever helped your grandparents with their phones or tech support or what have you. It was really really funny. But yeah, I thought he was great, and I think he worked really well.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think like as for some of the others, like let's talk about Giancarlo.
Hmm.
He kind of falls into a camp of supporting cast that s- stand out but don't really do much. Like there's just some wasted talent in this film, and I think Giancarlo
Hmm.
is one of them. He could have had a bigger impact, and I just think that he was. It just feels like he was shoehorned into this movie, and
Because he
based
kind of was.
he definitely was, and I think that
Yeah.
and it shows. We were having a offline discussion about how originally Seth Rollins was in this film. Seth Rollins is a WWE superstar, and he was to be featured as I don't know if it was going to be Sidewinder, but he was supposed to be featured as someone of Serpent Society,
Mhm.
and he was going to be one of the main antagonists. However, based on comicbook.com and even my interview, where I don't necessarily ask what happened to Seth Rollins, but I asked what Giancarlo brings to the final film that, with the changes that happen. He talks about how you have to find an authentic, real way to bring Serpent Society to life that doesn't, that doesn't feel like, characters dressed as snakes and, that they're,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? So with his interview with comicbook.com, he very much stated that, he loves Seth Rollins, but I don't think Seth Rollins was fitting that criteria, if you will. And
Yeah.
I think it was probably taking them out. They were really going for, as we've talked about, a grounded, gritty uh, espionage vibe that very much lives in the Captain America franchise. And maybe Seth Rollins was just taking them out. It was like, this guy is just he's not working as this villain. And I will say, with the moments that we got with Giancarlo, he definitely adds that grit and that realism, that authenticity that you would want. Like I see him as more of a military guy than some guy who would want to dress up as a snake and go out and shoot people. You know what I mean? Like I think they did the right idea pivoting. I just would have liked to have seen more of him.
Mhm. It definitely feels like this is Marvel's attempt at kind of redeeming what they did with Crossbones, where they set up the potential for this ongoing villain for Captain America that kind of fell by the wayside and became just, the opening scene character for a lot of things. And I think this way they're setting up this recurring villain for Captain America to be one of his greatest threats because of this his cunning mind and all this stuff. But like you said, he is just an addition to this film, and I wish we had more time with him because without him we could have spent more time with other people. But if we spent more time on him, we may have gotten a more grounded story. It's kind of all over the place. Again, there's so much in this film that it's hard to figure out what we would have wanted more of, I guess.
And honestly, his addition to this movie does not do much for the story. It's
No.
literally an introduction to his character, and I don't
Yeah.
think it's a spoiler to say yes, he survives because you don't hire someone like Giancarlo to be in a movie and then just off him, especially after all of the stuff around who he could have been in the MCU. He chose this character for a specific reason, and you can check out our interview with Giancarlo to find out more as to why.
Yeah, good plug. Shout out to Frank Grillo, by the way.
Yeah.
Grillo, or however you say his last name there. Grillo, Crossbones, never forget. But Giancarlo Esposito is a professional, and you can see it in your interview with him. He and anytime we ever see him talk, and we've had the pleasure of getting to hear him speak in person a few times, hear him preach in person a few times. For him to have such a presence for how little we get him in this movie, is still always impressive. And I love him as a villain. But yeah, I would have definitely loved more of him. I think it just kind of reminded me of some of the stuff with Ironheart, right, in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. It was just sort of like, okay, cool, we were introduced to that character, but they didn't really do anything.
Or the other character from Multiverse of Madness.
Sure, America Chavez.
Right?
Yeah,
Like it just
they're just there.
They were just there. She had I think a bigger role, I guess, towards the end, but at the end of the day, yeah, it's more of this film serves as an introduction to the character. You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
So we've already talked about one of our villains, Harrison Ford. Let's talk about Tim Blake Nelson, who's returning to the role of Dr. Samuel Stearns. He was obviously in The Incredible Hulk, which starred Edward Norton. I believe it was in 2008 or 2009. And he is returning as the leader. What do you guys think of his character? I think it's another one for me, at least. It was just a character that I wish I had more time with. That's what I'd say.
Yes, for sure. I really enjoyed the way they brought him to the screen here. Again, changing up some of the comic book origins that we got, I think are really cool. That's something I've always appreciated the MCU is how they adapt some of those more wild comic book story elements into this more grounded reality. He was great. There were moments that felt a bit odd in terms of some of the choices he made for the character, but there are definitely the times where you feel like, again, he is the smartest man in the world, and he has predicted everything to a certainty. And I really bought his motive and the drive behind his character. Again, I just wish we had more time with him because he seems like he's an afterthought. Once we're past a certain point, they're like, okay, now we can bring him in. And it's just like, why can't he just be there from the beginning? I don't know.
Yeah, Tim Blake Nelson for me, I love him in the 2019 Watchmen series. The guy's so good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it is a thing where the way they handled this character, there were moments that hit, and then there were a lot of moments that fell flat, and not because of Tim Blake Nelson, but because of what he had to work with.
Well, I think it's how the story was structured, right?
Yeah.
Like more or less, because I think he delivered in every scene.
Yeah,
I just don't, like, to your point, I don't think they handled his character right.
Yeah, his performance was great, is what I'm
Yes,
saying.
yeah.
But his what he was given to do, and how, I just thought it was, like Darcy, like you said, there were some weird decisions made around his character. I think the only other thing would be, I like the updated look. I think I would have liked it a little bit more if it was maybe a little more real,
Yeah,
and
it was
not
too CGI. Yeah,
not CG.
Mm-hmm.
But again, maybe that has something to do with how they had. I don't know. Something to do with the making of, right, that we don't know about.
We'll find out how they actually achieve that look probably later. But to your point,
Mm-hmm.
there are moments where it looks very CGI. I will say, I think holding the reveal of what he looked like helped his character.
Mm-hmm.
Until they initially did it. And then I think after that point is where his character and the writing for his character got a little shuffled and messy, if you will. So, but yeah, Tim Blake Nelson is great. And I just want to say, I actually, before the interviews that I did, I was able to attend the global press conference with all the actors and the director and the producer. And one thing that's really clear from watching that press conference is the admiration and love that this cast has for each other and respect for their craft. And Tim Blake Nelson really stands out as someone who acknowledges the art of acting as a means of the physicality while also the performative. There's just he's really stood out in that global press conferences, acknowledging what everyone brings to this film, and especially from with the director, with Julius. So yeah, I think that these characters, there's such a great admiration and respect for each other. It's just I wish the story would have treated them a little bit better. I think some of them got treated really really well. I think some got kind of fell by the wayside.
Yeah, and I think Tim Blake Nelson is so happy to be in this movie too, right? Especially given how long it's been. And I think it's like, you see that in interviews. You see how happy Anthony Mackie is to have his own Captain America movie. And yeah, I think even with someone like Harrison Ford, I've never seen him, you know, be so happy to talk about Hulks and things like that in these press junkets, because normally he is kind of it's funny how he's sort of very Thaddeus Ross in real life too.
I think he's also trying to demystify that too. Like he's trying to break
Sure.
away from that by showing that he can do these things. I don't think he's necessarily like, even look at what he's doing with Shrinking. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
Yeah.
Shrinking is trying to show a whole other side to who Harrison Ford is. I think everyone thinks of him as like a grumpy old man, and I'm sure he's been told that by people in his PR team. And maybe some of these roles that he's taking on, where he gets to kind of do this stuff, it's to allow him to kind of break that preconceived notion of what he might be. But yeah, he still plays into it from times to time, right? I remember seeing on the red carpet for the movie for Captain America Brave New World, where someone was like, how much of the MCU did you know? And he's like, nothing. It's just
Yeah.
like he just, he didn't know anything going into it. So, and that's completely honest, and you don't need to if you're just playing a character.
Especially if you're freaking Harrison Ford.
Right, exactly.
You can
Right,
do
and you're
whatever you
really
want.
concerned about like the story, which we should start talking about so we can wrap up this podcast. Yeah, let's talk about the story. We've been kind of circling around how this film struggles with a bit of an identity crisis. Is it a Captain America film? Is it an Incredible Hulk follow-up? Is it trying to be the Winter Soldier with more of that grit and political drama? I think thematically it knows that it wants to explore power, leadership, and legacy, but it definitely gets sidetracked by some, as we were mentioning in our previous section about characters, useless characters, and also just the world building for the future MCU projects. Like there is a big focus on Celestial Island, as you know, the introduction of adamantium, and it's this idea of a sort of geopolitical catalyst for this situation that kind of serves to um, I don't know, be the running problem, if you will, but it just seems like everything else is sort of distracting from that. Like there's all these great elements that are there. It just feels like there's too much. So it needs to be like shaved back or taken out. And I'm not sure how it would have been better, but it's clear that there's a bit of a messy situation with the narrative because it just never knows where to focus.
Yeah, I mean they're definitely. I think a lot of these characters were mishandled, and it made for some storylines that just didn't hit. I think coming out of this, I kind of said like it felt very classic Phase One MCU Marvel movie, but also in like good ways, but also in bad ways. I think when this movie takes the time to slow down, that's when it really shines, right? And I think it's those quick paced action portions of the film that feel more like the sort of messier side of the MCU, that really bogged down this movie and slogged down the movie with stuff that just sort of takes away from the emotional core of where it really could go. And I think it dabbles in it, right? It touches upon the Civil War side of things. It touches on the Winter Soldier side of things in a lot of ways, actually, as well. And then it just never quite allows that to be the focus. And yeah, and I think it just kind of it's unfortunate because I think there is so much good in this movie, but it gets distracting, or gets distracted quite easily.
Yeah, I mean, I think the overall story is really enjoyable. I walked out of there thinking like, yeah, the story was good. It was kind of how they went about exploring that story with the heavy-handed expositional dialogue at times, and then again those other times where they feel like these were added shots to justify something that happens later in the movie. It just there's too much in it to let you focus on what was really good story at its core. Just they put too many things in to focus on that took you away from the time that you could have spent really building that intrigue and that sense of that spy thriller that you were going for and we had in previous Captain America films. So again, while I enjoyed the story overall, it's how they went through the story that I had an issue with.
Yeah, I think that with the film, when you're coming off of a TV show, there's time, right? And there's this ability to have a conversation, as Brad Winderbaum says. And with a film, it's a statement. And I think that the statement here is very muddled. It's very
Mhm.
confusing, and I think it's a little all over the place. I also feel like, and you guys were talking about it, but I don't really know. Like Sam's journey feels very repetitive to what we already got from the Falcon and Winter Soldier. It's just part two of that in a lot of ways. And I think that was another thing. It was, I understand that he has to go through this idea of understanding how he's Captain America and who gives him orders, but it still feels like he's going through the same sort of struggles of trying to validate and feel like if he's worthy to be Captain America, which I felt like we really already got in the Falcon and Winter Soldier series, which is understanding why Steve gave him that shield. And now it feels like it's still more of that in a lot of ways. And that's why there's all these other characters in and around that are just kind of taking the weight off of him having to have a very Captain America centric story. And that's why we have like this very much Incredible Hulk sequel aspect to it, where we see a lot of returning characters and situations come up. But like even like we were talking about the political espionage vibe, like it starts off strong, but I find it sort of fizzles as we get towards that third act, and as the answers aren't as like a surprise. They're just like they're there. Do you know what I mean? Like you start to unravel this mystery a lot quicker as you get towards the end. And I think a lot of that has to do with just, underdeveloped story, but also like even just the villains. Like we were talking about the leader, he's very underdeveloped. Sidewinder is feels like he's very underdeveloped as well. And it's just like, what's the point of these threats, right? I understand that Thaddeus is meant to be the bigger threat, but I don't know. It didn't really, again, like you guys were mentioning, the focus is just so shifting. I just don't know where to be looking.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I would say in regards to Thaddeus, and we love seeing Harrison Ford acting and seeing him on screen. I will say in terms of Red Hulk, because I think this is a big aspect of the marketing, right? Where we've kind of gone, we kind of went from like, are we going to see a Red Hulk to like every poster, everything is showing off Red Hulk. I will just say, set your expectations, temper your expectations for how much Red Hulk you might be expecting in this movie. Just don't go in thinking that it's going to be a ton. Is all, because I think there are going to be people that are going to go into this based off the marketing and think like, oh, that's going to be a massive, element. It is, but it just doesn't quite. It's not there for as long as you might be expecting.
I feel like the marketing has done a really good job at saying like he's your final boss, and I
Mhm.
think that's how you can look at it. But the lead up to it is the journey and what we've been talking about in terms of that sort of muddledness. Um, cool. Well, now that we've kind of shared our thoughts on the look and feel, performances, and story, I'd love to know what your final scores are and any other final thoughts. And today we'll be rating this film out of 1 to 5 shield bounces.
Bounces.
Nate, why don't you kick things off?
Yeah, I think this movie again, it's that identity crisis like we've been talking about. I wanted it to be so much more for Anthony Mackie, right? For
Yes.
Sam Wilson.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be that return to form in just positive ways, right? Not those negative ways. I wanted it to feel, kind of its own thing, but more grounded than I think we ended up with, right? And I think that was the biggest thing. Is it's really difficult to do that when when you've got to sort of tie in all these loose threads. We went into this movie, we even just recently, I remember talking about the idea that, like, I think it was on our Thunderbolts reaction of just like, Thunderbolts feels like it's going to have its ability to sort of be its own thing, whereas this movie very much has to just sort of, they have to bring in all these other things and tie up stuff and deal with certain elements, to the point where I remember seeing an IGN article that said, like, here's all the things that you need to be aware of going into Captain America 4. And I get that, the MCU is very much a giant mini series of its own, or series of its own of stories. But at the same time, I think this movie is trying to be both a Brave New World and Captain America 4, and that's really where it's butting heads with itself. And so, yeah, I it's tough because I think my initial hype coming out of this movie, I was at a 3.5, and I'm kind of landing on a 3 out of 5. Shield bounces. Is that it?
Correct.
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, Nate, I'm right there with you. Like you said, I really wanted to see another Captain America movie, and while I appreciated that we got the Captain America and Thunderbolt Ross movie out of this, I was hoping for more of a Captain America central story. And again, the story, like I said, I was really enjoyable overall. The overall theme they were trying to go for with the whole plot and everything really was satisfying by the end. It was just the repetitive nature of some of the expositional dialogue really took me out of it at times, and then later on with some of those, again, noticeable reshoot touches really, again, had that early MCU vibe to it, where it wasn't as refined as some of the later films we got in the MCU. So yeah, I'm right there with you, Nate. I'll be giving this one 3 out of 5 shield bounces.
Nice. Well, I'm glad that we're all on the same page, because I'm with you guys. I feel like, this film is ambitious, and it's uneven as it sort of begins, as we were talking about the next journey for the MCU. It I wanted something that was more akin to a Winter Soldier, a Civil War. This movie never really commits to that. It gives us moments of that, and it kind of just uses it for style and so on. I think the action is solid in some instances, but it also lacks the weight and intensity that I think that some of the hand-to-hand combats that we got from previous iterations that I really appreciated, and which defined, I think, Captain America films. Like, I think especially in Winter Soldier and Civil War. There's some great performances. I think, like you said, Nate, I think Anthony Mackie, I would love for him to have been treated better in this film. In a lot of ways, I think he deserves so much better. I think Anthony Mackie deserves so much better than what he got in this film. I think he has to share with a lot of fantastic talent, but I think that those characters are misused and mishandled in a lot of ways, and it really does shift the focus. And like we've all been saying, I think this story struggles with balancing its identity, and at times it feels more like an Incredible Hulk sequel than it does a true Captain America film. And I think you said it best there, Nate. It's the Captain America and the Brave New World that are conflicting with each other. It's trying to do two things in it, and it's not really hitting that. And while it has moments of intrigue and some fun action, as we mentioned, I think it's just a missed opportunity to really explore the next chapter in Sam Wilson's journey as Cap. So yeah, I'm with you with the enjoyable parts and the bumps along the way. I don't know if this movie really fully reaches the heights of what I would hope from a Captain America movie. So I'm giving it 3 out of 5 shield bounces.
Yeah, I almost feel like, Justin, let me know if you agree. Like, I think this movie, what if this movie had just come out in a different point in our timeline, right? In the sense that, like, it's coming out with all this weight on it, right? Coming out with, like, having to deal with the celestial stuff, having to deal with all this other stuff. If this movie came out, like, pretty much a year after Falcon and Winter Soldier, I think it could have had the opportunity to shine much more as what we were looking for. Then I think it's a very poor placement for it in terms of the overall timeline.
But like you're saying, it's cluttered too. There's so much that it needs to do and help move for the MCU moving forward, that when you look at those other Cap films, they were literally just about Steve Rogers.
They
Right?
didn't have to.
They didn't have
Exactly. That's
to.
what I'm
They
saying.
They didn't have to do anything. It didn't have anything on its shoulders that it had to do. I guess the biggest thing that Civil War had to do was set up the conflict of the Avengers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was able to do that while still staying character focused. So I feel like with this film, we've gotten away from what Captain America films have done, where they stay character focused on Cap. And I think the show did it better. Like I said, the show, Falcon and Winter Soldier, say what you will about that show, but I think it did a better job of setting up Sam Wilson and talking about Sam Wilson as Captain America versus what this movie gave us. Because I feel like he's a secondary character in his own film. So, well, that is it for our spoiler-free review for Marvel Studios' Captain America Brave New World. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, feel free to subscribe to us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to write into the show and let us know your thoughts on this film, and maybe we're crazy, maybe we're right, maybe we got something wrong, you let us know. You can reach out to us at wearegeekcentric@gmail.com. That's wearegeekcentric@gmail.com. Or you can reach out to us on Twitter at GeekcentricYT or on Instagram and TikTok at We Are Geekcentric. Keep in mind, we have a ton of other great episodes, like our most recent This Week in Geek episode, where Kevin, Nate, and I discuss all the big game spots from the Super Bowl Sunday event that dropped, and also trailers that dropped throughout the week. So we talk about Fantastic Four, we talk about Thunderbolts, we talk about Jurassic World Rebirth. It's all there. That's available.
No Smurfs. I'm disappointed.
I know. We should.
I painted myself blue and showed up for that, and
you
they
blew
were like,
yourself.
"We're not talking
You
about
blew
it."
yourself.
I blew myself. I did.
Yeah, exactly. We also have a ton of great spoiler-free reviews out now for you to enjoy, including our spoiler-free review for Invincible Season 3 for the first 6 episodes, as well as our spoiler-free review for Kihei Kwan's Love Hurts. We also have our spoiler-free review for Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which is almost done. And we also have our spoiler-free review for Mythic Quest Season 4 and Severance Season 2. We also have a ton of interviews, like our most recent interviews with some fantastic folks from this movie. We mentioned it throughout. We were mentioning it throughout this review. I had the opportunity to sit down with Julius Ona, the director of Captain America: Brave New World, as well as Giancarlo Esposito, who is Sidewinder in this film. Julius shares some more insight around keeping the film grounded while also adding some of those fantastical MCU elements, while Giancarlo talks about what it's like being a villain again. Both of those interviews are available on YouTube at youtube.com/geekcentric and on podcast feeds for you to enjoy. But we also got a lot of stuff coming soon. We have our review for the Pixar original television series Win or Lose, which is coming out next week. We also have, we're going to be also doing some coverage for Daredevil Born Again, which is another Marvel Studios property. We're excited to talk about that as well. So there's a lot to look forward to. Trips are being planned for the guys here. They're going to Japan soon. So there's going to be some Star Wars celebration stuff that's going to happen in April, courtesy of Nate and Darcy. But yeah, until then, so much to look forward to, guys. Like, geez, we got through this. Now we can look forward to what is next. I appreciate you guys taking the time to join me for this spoiler-free review. And as we say,
on your left. Love ya.
Laters.
Peace.